Dragon Ballers, if you're looking to buy Dragon Ball Super or One Piece sealed product, make sure to get 5% off using my link to Mystic TCG down in the description. You can also sell cards to them using their Facebook link, which is also down in the description. Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another video. We're back into set 21 reveals, and it seems like for Black this time around, they're not getting their own archetype or new leader. Instead, they're going to be giving some legacy support to older decks in the Black slots for this upcoming set. So we're gonna go over the cards that support Mechikabura in today's video. So if you guys are fan favorites of this deck, you might want to stick around. I'll be giving my thoughts on these cards and their competitive viability. So if you guys are new, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video, and let's jump right on in. So real quick, just going back over the leader and kind of the strengths of it, just to refresh anyone who might not have played or looked at this leader in quite some time. The main thing with this deck is drop area interruption. You have that through the Dark Dragon Balls, through a couple battle card effects throughout the deck. So it is actually pretty good, maybe less good now. It was actually kind of decent against Crimson because Crimson revolved on the drop area heavily. I think now there's, you know, quite a bit less of that, but it is a good deck, or maybe like a good anti-meta deck if there's ever a strategy that really does revolve around the drop area. Is kind of something to look at there. And the other cool thing is you have the triple attack on the leader, which does actually get around quite a few floodgates in this current format. And you have the ability to steal battle cards that cost 4 or less, which is kind of an underrated ability. It is definitely kind of strong. And there's certain things you can do with that as well. So like, for example, when you steal the battle cards, they become skillless, and there's a 3-cost mirror unison that interacts with those skilllesses that you take. I believe you remove a skillless from the game and like draw a card and warp one of your opponent's battle cards off the board. I might be jumbling up a bit of the effect there, but it is a really interesting interaction. A 3-cost black unison is kind of steep though, especially going second against maybe like an aggro deck. But still, it's a pretty cool interaction that does actually lead to you drawing quite a bit of cards. Then we have Springtime Time, Mastermind's Pawn, a much more recent piece of support for this deck. It's another Self-Awakener, and it also gives you a little bit of hand control against your opponent, which is definitely kind of cool. It is a 20k swinger because it does have the Servant. Typically, the deck doesn't play too much Overlord, so that's always been a little bit of an issue. But you can always tech for that. You can always try to tech in some Overlord, but I don't think personally the Overlord cards in this deck are necessarily the strongest. So this might just sit on your board as a 20k after swinging once and really just serving as a Self-Awakening hand control card, which is not the worst. You can always combo it to Z energy as well if you're just you know, not wanting it to sit on the board in rest mode. But yeah, these are some of the recent cards for the deck, and generally this card's really good, but it didn't really bolster Meki into like the meta all on its own. But now we have a couple cards here that are actually going to boost the deck. Let's see what they do. So the first one we have is Dark King Mechikabura, ruler of the Demon Realm. We have a 1-drop 4K auto. If your leader is Mechikabura only, when this card is played, look at your deck, add up to 1 Dark Dragon Ball, and place 1 in your drop, and then shuffle your deck. So another Self-Awakener. It is a decent 1-drop. Again, comboed off the Z energy. That's all good. Then we have the Activate main, limit 1 for 3 black. If your leader is Mechikabura only, your opponent has 3 or more energy, and you send this card from your drop to your warp. Send one of your opponent's battle cards from their drop to their warp, and then play 1 black Mechikabura with an energy cost of 8 and a power of 30k from your hand or drop, and that card gains a barrier for the turn. So the main one made for this archetype is Dark King Mechikabura, power restored. So we have a 30k deflect double strike, which will also gain barrier, which will protect it from certain things that certain strategies can do. I don't think the barrier is honestly all that necessary, but it is cool to cheat it out for 1 less energy. So if your opponent has 4 more cards in their warp, when this card's played, choose all your opponent's battle cards and send them to the owner's warp. Then choose 2 of your opponent's battle cards in their warp with energy costs of 7 or less and different card names, negate their skills for the game, and play them in your battle area. And you can't play non-black battle cards for the turn. So you get a couple of beaters to your side of the board alongside your 30k double striker. And then normally for 4, you can play this card from your hand. So yeah, keep in mind the 1-drop requires your opponent to have 3 or more energy. So if you go first, this is still going to be a turn 4 play. However, you do get to keep 1 energy open, which is kind of nice. I was actually testing Mechikabura probably like 2 or 3 formats ago, and while it did have a lot of powerful things it could do, one of the main problems was it was a mid-range black deck that couldn't really leave energy open for defense without falling behind. So having this to cheat out your boss monster is definitely kind of nice, and it is cool too that you can play the Dark King from the drop area, so you can like petrification, discard it, or whatever other discard outlets you might have. I can't remember if the Dark Dragon Balls discard Demon Realm races. If they do, that's even better. So yeah, cool card. I can see it being pretty decent in this deck, but this alone I don't think will bring this deck into the limelight. Let's check out a bit more that we've got here. All right, so we have a new Salsa and Shroom for the archetypes. Let's start with Salsa, Violent, Majin, Assault. Are these things Majin, or are they just attacking Majins? I have no idea really about anything Dragon Ball Heroes related. But anyways, we have a 4-drop 15k critical permanent. If this card would leave your battle area or move it from the game instead, auto when this card's played, your opponent sends 1 card from their hand to the warp, and then they draw 1 card. Activate main limit 1 for a black. If your leader is Mechikabura only, you have 2 or more energy. Play this card from your hand or drop. Okay, that's actually kind of nuts. Okay, so I did just go back and read the Dark Dragon Ball, which I should have done before this video, but it does actually discard Demon Realm races. So yeah, the fact that you can pitch this thing to get your draw cycle going and then play it from your drop is actually insane. It doesn't take anything away from your hand size. It gets your opponent set up with cards in their warp for your various effects. This seems almost like a 4 of. I think this is a really good card for the deck. Then we have Shroom, Violent, Majin, Assault. We have a 5-drop 20k, auto limit 1 when this card attacks. Choose one of your opponent's battle cards with energy cost of 7 or less and send it to their warp. Additionally, if your opponent has 2 or more cards in their warp, draw 1. This is actually a +1 and removal, which again is actually insanely good. And then activate the 1 for a black. If your leader's Mechikabura only, your opponent has 2 or more energy, play this card from your hand. So Shroom does not have the flexibility of being played from the drop. However, it's still a really good card. Getting your opponent to 2 or more cards in warp is going to be almost like a non-factor in this deck. Like, it's just that easy. So you generate draws and get removal. So yeah, with these cards both being 4 ofs, the only problem I see is like making room in the Mechikabura deck. Because I remember when I was testing the deck, it was a pretty firm 60 cards. A lot of Wish decks being 60 cards because you got to fit the 7 Dragon Balls in there. And even in this deck, where a good majority of your Dragon Balls actually dig 2 cards deep into your deck, you get through your deck very quickly. So 60 cards is not really an issue. But yeah, definitely going to be a very reworked strategy with these cards, but they both definitely deserve to be in the deck. I want to say 4 ofs, maybe 3 ofs, only because they can only be used on your opponent's 2 energy, which could delay it to your turn 3. But still, I mean, these cards are really good. All right, then the final card we have for this archetype is Dark King Mechikabura Last Judgment. This is an SCR coming out in the set. A lot of people are dogging on the card for not being very good. Let's give it a read and then I'll give my thoughts. So we have an 8-drop 40k, ultimate, dual attack, counterplay, play this card. For every card in your opponent's Z deck, place up to 1 battle card from your drop or warp under this card, and this card can't be removed from your battle area by your opponent's skills for the turn. So let's stop right there real quick. Pretty interesting how it interacts with your opponent's Z deck count. So for every Z deck card they've used, this effect is just like a little bit worse. But I mean, how many cards you really need to put under this, we'll check that out in just a little bit. It also can't be removed from your battle area by your opponent's skills for the turn. So that is the turn that it's played. So let's think about when we're actually going to play this card. This thing being a counter play, you know, spoiler alert, it reduces itself down to a 1 cost. A lot of times you can use this to respond to a floodgate, right? So in that case, you'll be playing it during your own turn, and then for the rest of your own turn, it's gonna have that really good protection. Like in this case, that's actually just better than barrier. It's super good. I think it even bypasses Final Flash because it's an effect that activates and resolves, and then afterwards it can't be negated. It's not like a permanent on the card. It's something that activated, resolved, and not even Final Flash could like get this thing off the board. If I'm wrong about that, let me know in the comments below. I'm pretty sure it's how it works. But yeah, so you're going to play this a lot during your own turn to stop a floodgate. During your opponent's turn, you can still use it, of course. I don't know how useful that's going to be because a lot of the big bombs are either higher than 7 cost, which this can respond to only 7 or less. So it can't hit the SCRs without deflect like Golden Cooler or Gohan Beast. And I can't really think of too many lower cost bombs that are really going to be that impactful that you want this thing to hit. Like there's Dread Destroyer, which is a really powerful non-deflect card, but I mean that's going to come down way too early in the game most of the time for this thing to actually be a factor. But yeah, so using it during your own turn is really cool because you have Super Kamehameha as a black deck to counterplay a lot of the common floodgates like Android 14, Inorganic Horror. You've got 17 Defending Friends. You've got all the yellow floodgates like Riposte and stuff. And then this can actually hit higher cost floodgates like Maybe Ready to Rumble, which isn't super popular, but you do actually have the blue-green Android 21 floodgate. That's a 4 cost 25k. Most decks have no real way of interacting with that floodgate, so this does actually respond to that. So let's read the rest of the counterplay. We have additionally, if the battle card being played is going to cost 7 or less, send it to your warp instead. That's interesting how it sends it to, if it's like your opponent's card, sends it to your own warp, if I'm reading that correctly. That's kind of weird, but still, I mean, regardless, this is a 1 cost counter to anything 7 or less. So let's read the rest of it, and I guess we'll compare it to other things. So we have permanent. If the total number of cards in you and your opponent's warp is 7 or more, reduce energy cost of this card in your hand by 7. There's the 1 cost aspect of it. And then auto, place 1 card from under this card into your drop. When this card or your opponent attacks, choose one of your opponent's battle cards and send it to the owner's warp. Okay, so for all the cards you have underneath it, you basically get to rip apart your opponent's board. However, again, I don't think that's going to be the most impactful thing. Like, of course, you want to remove the maximum amount of cards from them. And I guess if you do end up sneaking this in during your opponent's turn, if you can, you know, put like 7 cards under this, if possible, I guess you can like remove your opponent's entire board for each time they attack, which is kind of cool. But again, I really foresee this thing coming down on your own turn majority of the time, which also makes the removal effect a little bit better, because then there's nothing your opponent can do to interact with it as you're attacking with it. Yeah, the main comparison here is definitely going to be to Cumber SCR, which I think definitely is looked at as one of the most powerful SCRs in the game. You play it, you can burn your opponent all the way down to 1 life because its condition activates if your opponent's at 2 or more life. A lot of burn effects we have right now don't really work unless your opponent's at a certain life threshold. Cumber, or I guess it's technically Evil Mass Sand, gives you some of the lowest life threshold for burning your opponent. It also interacts with floodgates in a very interesting way. So if you're the Cumber player and you attack into your opponent and they go with like a robotic riposte, your auto to steal the riposte is going to resolve before their auto to floodgate you. So the auto to floodgate actually resolves for the Cumber player, meaning your opponent actually just basically fizzled on that riposte or whatever floodgate it was they played, which is a really strong interaction, of course. Cumber doesn't have any great protection, however it's still really impactful as soon as you play it, so not having protection typically doesn't matter all that much. So yeah, Cumber is really good for what it does for 2 energy, but keep in mind this costs less. So for costing less, it's okay to be a little bit weaker, but even that being said, I think this is really strong for 1 energy. I think this could be a really format dependent SCR, and I think that's where we're going to see if, you know, black decks prefer to play Cumber versus this card. I think overall Cumber is a more powerful card, but I think if the format remains very floodgate heavy, which might even trend towards that, if we do see significant hits to red, things might slow down quite a bit, and we might see a lot more floodgates in the format, especially with the blue-green decks being as powerful as they are. This could be a really good card in black decks to allow them to get that final push, because if your opponent taps 4 for a 4-cost floodgate and you respond with this, they're most likely defenseless, and this will combo actually really well with Gohan Changing History, which is a card that punishes things like dimension magic. So your opponent will tap out for that 4-cost floodgate, won't really be able to untap because you have the card that punishes untapping on the board, and then you kind of secure the game from there. So that's just what I'm getting at, where I'm talking about this being a very meta dependent SCR. If that doesn't really happen, if we don't really see that type of trend towards tons of high cost floodgates, then yeah, Cumber is probably better, but I do think this is going to be a solid black SCR in the right formats for sure. And you know what, if it's not that great on release, maybe it'll be cheap and it'll be a solid budget alternative as well, so that's also a pretty decent upside. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking about in today's video, guys. I think the Mechikabura deck gets a lot of really good tools. The Shroom and Salsa are very, very impressive, as well as the Supreme Kai of Time Mastermind's Pawn that we read earlier. Maybe that'll be enough to kind of bring this deck up into a more rogue sphere, because again, Mechikabura's success is somewhat dependent on drop area decks being relevant in the game. So we'll see if that happens. But anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think about this deck if you're excited for it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.